This is the Troutbitten Podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout.
Wild trout. This is Troutbitten.
This is the Troutbitten Podcast, and thanks for tuning in. My name is Dominic Swantowski. I'm the owner of Troutbitten and the author of Troutbitten.com. So with episode 7 of this Troutbitten Skills Series, we've finally come to the point where we've covered all the different ways to move a streamer and give it some animation. And now, it's time to put all of it together. This whole series has been about what motions might sell the presentation, because how we move the streamer fools the next trout. And there's such a wealth of options that it can be very helpful to break things down into individual parts. That's what we've done already. So we talked about jerk strips, glides, slides, speed leads and lane changes, jigs, and head flips. We've talked a lot about the position or orientation of the fly in the water. Is it drifting with the current, crossing currents, or swinging against them? Is the streamer near the surface, or is it deep? And within all of these animations, are we moving the fly quick or smooth? And are the motions long or short? See, there's a lot of it. If there's something we missed, I really can't think of it. Now, for the last 3 episodes of this Streamer Presentation Skills Series, we're going to talk about putting a group of these animations into a system or a mindset or a framework for fishing your streamer. And tonight, we're here to introduce the concept of the crossover technique, which is all about getting the streamer low in the strike zone and then animating it within a narrow range, being careful not to move the fly out of that strike zone or move it too far. It's really a fun presentation style if you can get your brain around the small, often minor animations that are necessary. The crossover is also extremely effective, and it results in a much lower, let's call it a refusal percentage, than most streamer tactics, meaning trout eat it. They don't just go for it, sideswipe it, and refuse it. So we can go out and choose only to swing flies or to strip them cross current or to slow slide, to jerk strip, or just to jig. The point is, each of the presentations we talked about in the previous episodes stands alone as a great way to show the streamer to a trout. You can do that all day. Pick one and do it all day. But we also like to spend time combining these presentations because that's fun too. Because fishing streamers like this is a creative and fluid process of working with what the river gives you and adapting to new situations, moment after moment, around the next bend, down the next run. So the real trick with something like the crossover is to be disciplined enough to stay within your framework while also using your creativity. All right, before we get into our listener question, I just want to say thank you to everyone out there for your support this season on all the channels, through all the avenues of Troutbitten. We greatly appreciate your kindness, and we're glad to know that you connect with what we're doing here. Thanks also to our sponsors this season, Squala, Orvis, New Trail Brewing Company, Trout Routes, Smith Creek, and Tajima Direct. These excellent companies and your support of these companies through Troutbitten are what make all of this possible. Thanks again to everyone out there for being part of it all. All right, then, here's my co-host, Mr. Austin Dando. And thanks for being here, buddy. You too. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
How happy?
Pretty happy today.
Yeah?
Some days I'm not as happy. I feel pretty good.
You have a nice job. You have a nice life. You go fishing once in a while. You kind of have control of your hours.
A little
right?
bit. A little bit.
That's pretty good.
I like to cross over too, so what's wrong with that?
All right. Let's jump into a listener question then from Larson Wales. See me moving us along real quick?
That's a good
We have a
name.
lot to talk about. Yeah. I like Larson.
Yeah,
right?
Larson Wales. That sounds very like royal or something.
I know, like he's from the UK. I
Yeah.
don't know where he's from, but it's through email. You want to read it?
Okay, so Larson writes, I have a thought that might be counter to your philosophy on streamer tactics.
Sounds good.
You guys have been talking about dialing in a presentation for the day or finding out what the trout want. But all that can change with each fish and with each new piece of water. What if the sun comes out? What happens around the next bend? And what if the water temperature is colder in the next hole? These variables would all change what a trout prefers, would they not? I tend to believe that dialing anything in is a myth. It seems more like luck or a coincidence and not correlation. What do you think?
So I got this question a couple times, or comment, let's say a couple times. Another very similar one came in on the website. And, that's great. I love it. I love other people's ideas, especially when they're well thought out. You can tell Larson fishes and has some thoughts, right? I mean, that's what our podcast is when we get Deli and Trevor and Josh and Matt and you and me together. The same kind of thing. Like, I don't think so, buddy. Here's what I think. So that's great. I'll tell you what, Austin, I always, I tend to be the first to answer on this. And have you, what do you think? What's your comment? Reply, I guess.
Yeah, everything sometimes, right? But I think of this two ways. It's one idea of dialing in something for the day versus dialing in something for a portion of the day.
Sure.
So, I experience different feeding behaviors throughout the day, and maybe they're eating a streamer differently but consistently, hour by hour. So, the sun up to 1 o'clock or something, they may really want the crossover. And then from 1 to 2:30, all of a sudden they're not eating that anymore. And I just realize that they're eating a slow slide or something. Or same thing with patterns. If I'm nymphing, they might want eggs really, really hard in the morning. And then all of a sudden that tapers off. But I find out that a small BWO or something up high is doing well later on.
Yeah.
I think that ideology of dialing something in aligns with me more than say I'm going to try to find one thing that works all day long no matter what.
I agree.
Now, that can be the case too, but less likely.
I know. So I'm fishing tomorrow with Philip, and I'm going to do one thing all day. I'm going to do the crossover. You and I talked about how when we're talking about something, we tend to do it out on the water. I'm doing one thing. I might not even take nymphs again. I've been doing this quite a bit, just fishing streamers.
Right on.
And I'm going to go as far as to not even bring anything bigger than 2.5 inches. And we're going to talk about how that kind of applies to the crossover. Right. But I'm going to choose to do one thing, and I'm not going to try to adapt. I'm not going to adapt my flies or my fishing style to the fish, but I am going to really look for the water that they're fishing in. So for me, there's always something to find.
That's good too.
You made a good point. And Larson said this too. Things change throughout the day. So he says that this whole idea of dialing something in is a myth. He says, it seems a lot more like luck or coincidence and not correlation. I don't agree with that. I think that we've all fished enough, and especially when there's a bunch of us out there together, we find things that are working. We all come back to the truck and we say like, hey, they were eating in some slow stuff near the bank, or they were eating, hey, they were coming off the bottom. They were eating mid-column. They were eating emergers coming up through, and I was swinging my flies out, or whatever the case.
Yeah.
We definitely see that. It's not just guessing. It's not, accidental correlation.
Right.
It's there. It's there to be found.
Yep.
Not every day. And especially with streamers, I would say not every day. I do know that many anglers do not approach fishing this way.
Yeah.
I think we do because we fish a lot. And maybe because we're sort of forced into it by the trout that we fish over. If you don't kind of have an approach that really tries to figure things out, well, then you're going to miss a lot because you're relying on luck.
Yep.
And I think, too, relying on luck is just not as fun.
Nope.
You said that. Yeah.
And I think, too, because things you just mentioned there where we can find trends, there certainly seems to be a population of the trout that are in our rivers that end up doing the same things. And at the same time, there's a population that's not doing any of those things.
That's a really good point.
We're going to catch the ones that are falling in line, and we're probably not going to catch the ones within 5 feet of them that are not doing the same,
There you go.
So it's hard to ever say really, but that's what my experience tells me.
Yeah, you're kind of bringing up the other argument that I hear a lot is like, well, every trout's an individual. So this idea that you can get the trout
Well,
on...
I'm not going to that level.
Well, tell me more about that.
What I'm saying is there may be a majority of trout doing similar things or eating similar food items at a time.
Right.
And we're going to catch those majority of the fish.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there may be a small percentage that are keyed into something else.
Totally different.
And, we're not catching those, but we don't really notice or know the difference.
Yeah. And all we can do is try different things.
Yeah.
But I said this in the intro, disciplined about trying that one thing. And it doesn't matter if I'm fishing streamers, dry flies, nymphs, or wet flies. I almost always have a reason that I've made that last change. And I plan on trying something, I don't know, for a while. That's variable. Until I kind of determine, hey, that worked, or that didn't work. the easiest thing to change is to move upstream or go somewhere different to a different piece of water. That might only be 10 feet over. It might be 100 yards up. Yes. But change something. Test things honestly, I suppose, right? And with intention. And then you're going to find things. You really will. You're not going to find things that are just coincidence, especially if you fish a lot. When you put it all together, not most days, especially with streamers. I would say most days I don't walk away from the river saying, you know what? They were on tall jigs that were coming up and then dropping pretty far and coming up and then dropping pretty far.
Sure.
Or, hey, they were on a slow slide. Yeah, most days I don't get to walk away from the river saying that. 30%, probably not 50% of the days do I get to.
Sure. Yep.
You know what I mean?
Percentages, sure.
You can find a water type, but most days you don't just get a pat. You can say generally, hey man, they were eating really low. I had to get really low. When I was fishing mid-column, could not get them.
Yeah.
You know, they wouldn't chase. They were eating big stuff. Boy, they weren't eating big stuff. You know, those generalities, yeah. And then on the best days, man, you can really dial them in on one of these tactics or a combination of these tactics that we're talking about. So that kind of leads us into this idea of the crossover. Let me first thank Larson Wales for that email. And I mean it, everybody who throws these questions at us, it gives us a great idea about what to talk about next, what to clarify, maybe where we're falling short, like it was with the head flip a couple podcasts ago. Guys, like, I can't do a head flip on a sinking line. I'm like, oh yeah.
Right.
You can pivot it, but you can't really do a full flip.
Yeah.
Anyway, we thank you for the questions, and it's a cool way to just stay involved because we've said for a long time, this whole Troutbitten thing is a community. And if you're listening, you're part of it. Thanks. It's Audience Appreciation Week, Austin.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you to all of our audience.
So I started to say the crossover is like a mindset that you want to say, here's how I'm going to fish. Intentionally, I'm going to try this crossover for the next half hour or an hour or for this whole outside bend. If nothing happens, then I might switch. And what you would switch to is a whole different conversation. But let's talk about the crossover technique. In October of 2019, I went back and looked at this. I wrote my first article about all this crossover stuff. And I've referred to it many times since. I've often mentioned that when I have a day on the water to do whatever I like, and if there's not like a hatch right in front of me with rising fish or a reason to do something else, then I work on the crossover. I've told you guys this. You guys know this. And really, I mean it. For about the last 6 or 8 years, as I look back, I was like, wow, it's been that long. This has been a major focus for me.
Yeah. That's crazy.
And it has been because I've always felt like there's a lot left on the table with streamer fishing. Like a lot more is possible if we take the food to the trout, take the streamer to the trout, hopefully better imitating what real bait fish do when they're in a vulnerable state. And then too, not asking the trout to do too much to like go and eat the streamer, you know, to not have to chase it down for 5 feet or to come up through the water column or to chase it downstream. We know trout aren't usually very aggressive and not all that eager to chase things down or put themselves in a vulnerable or exposed position. So the idea of the crossover for a long time for me has been, you know, taking it to the fish, taking the streamer to the fish. But in this way too, I call it a crossover because it's very much about combining nymphing tactics or a methodology or almost a mindset with streamers too. It's kind of part streamer fishing and part nymph fishing. And now through the years, I go through spells where I'll take the crossover and just really lean into the nymphing side. You know, try to get dead drifts very close to it and just very minor animations with the streamers. Lately, I've been expanding on the other side. And I've done this before, but especially lately, I've been saying, I haven't even been putting that nymph on. We'll talk about rigs here in a minute. A lot of times I run a streamer on the bottom, nymph up top. Okay. And lately, I've often then leaned to not even putting the nymph on. Still, though, thinking a little bit like a nymph. But then, streamers. Streamers, that's what I'm doing. But I'm doing it in this almost nymphy kind of way.
That's what I'm doing.
Nymphy,
Where am I?
So I guess what I'm talking about is taking some of the key elements that make nymphing work so well over to the streamer game. And I'm pretty excited about this podcast episode. You and I have been talking about it. You know, I've been fishing this way for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'd say this winter, especially from late November on, I feel like I've had a couple breakthroughs. And I don't mean to make too much of it. It's probably just been a lucky couple months, right?
Yeah.
But really, breakthrough might be a big word. But to me, fishing's my life, right? And I'm like, ooh, I'm kind of on to something for me. Things that hadn't worked for me are working for me with just subtle things. And we'll get to what those subtle things have been. The crossovers always worked for me, but I've always, like I said, felt like more is possible. So I'm glad to put all those ideas into one package, I guess, like the nymphing stuff combined with streamer stuff. And I've been fishing this way a lot, not just this winter, but yeah, for a long time.
Yeah, certainly.
You have any initial thoughts about the crossover, Austin? Whether it's after a fishing trip or at a backyard fire, you can bet the Troutbitten crew has a case of New Trail Broken Heels along with us. It's honestly our favorite beer. This hazy IPA is smooth and full-bodied. Hand-selected citra hops lead to notes of bright clementine and juicy ruby red grapefruit. Broken Heels is a keeper. New Trail beer is proudly brewed in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and delivered cold to your favorite craft beer retailer every week. At New Trail, it's not about being the best angler. It's about getting out there. So enjoy nature's moments and reward yourself for a day well fished with New Trail Broken Heels. It's Troutbitten's favorite beer.
The landscape is changing for trout anglers. No doubt you've already noticed another truck at your favorite access point and seen more anglers on the water. For those looking for new challenges and fishing opportunities, Trout Routes has the data to help you avoid the crowds and explore new public water. Trout Routes has mapped more than 50,000 trout streams across the country with curated, detailed maps of public land and access points. Trout Routes has developed integrated and interactive data, putting the tools in your hands to research new water and help you navigate in the wild to know exactly where you stand in the current. It's still up to you to find those deep pools and undercuts, but Trout Routes helps you get on the water, connecting you with resources like fly shops and stream gauges for trout water across the country. Download Trout Routes in the App Store today. Then use the code Troutbitten for 20% off your membership at maps.troutroutes.com.
I was thinking about the crossover earlier today, and I think I really like it. And I think the reason why I like it is, it's one, I think I naturally sort of fish this way already with streamers, is something that's kind of low and slow,
right?
Maybe small, but active animations or whatever it may be of the fly. And I seem to do well on it. So I fish that way quite a bit when I am streamer fishing. So I think naturally I am drawn to this style.
You and I have talked about it for years, right?
Yeah.
So we should define it. And I've been saying it's kind of like nymphs. You're fishing streamers kind of like nymphs. But how? What do we mean by that? And I'll start by saying we're drifting with the current. So I cast upstream. I don't think I can do a crossover technique by casting my flies downstream. It has to start with the fly going upstream so that I can get something like a dead drift.
Yep.
But I am not trying to dead drift with a crossover. Let me make that clear from the beginning.
Right on.
I'm not trying to just nymph my streamers. I'm not trying to just dead drift them, but I do want to drift them, bring them down through the current. Really, I want to start with glides like we talked about a couple podcasts ago.
Yeah, and the idea there is to make them available, get them down. Yeah. And we're not going to ask a whole lot of the trout, but we're going to put them down in the strike zone where those trout often spend their time. And that's probably the most important part about all of this.
I think so. We should identify that strike zone. I know we have before.
Yeah.
What we call the strike zone is, I'm going to say, a 10-inch cushion of water on the bottom. And I'm just generalizing. But yeah, it could be 4, 6, 10, 12, 14. It's not 2 feet tall off the bottom. It's gone slower. It's a cushion of water. We've talked about this a lot. It's like its own little river down there. That it's where all the good stuff happens in a river. That's where the real nymphs are living. It's where the bait fish are definitely living. They're not hanging out in the middle of the column. So every good thing happens in the strike zone. We've done a full podcast on what the strike zone is. And that's the zone. That's the place to put your streamer for this crossover technique. And you could put your streamer wherever you want. But if it's mid-column and out of the strike zone, then I'm not going to call it a crossover. Again, you can call it whatever you like. I mean, anybody out there listening, our terms don't matter, right? They don't.
Yeah.
They're just for us to be able to communicate with each other.
Exactly.
And for
Be
me
able
to think
describe
about it 10 years, for me to think about it like 10 years from now and think like, oh yeah, that crossover. For us, to be able to communicate with you guys too.
Yeah, exactly.
Once it's in that strike zone, I'm just not moving it much out of that natural drift. That's how it kind of starts with this nymphing concept. We said like, how's it like a nymph? It starts with getting it down into that strike zone, which is where we're usually trying to nymph, unless there's something that, there's some hatch going on, whatnot. Usually getting your nymphs in that strike zone is the key to nymphing. So I'll get the streamer into that strike zone and then drift it. Not necessarily dead drift, but maybe establish that dead drift and then start animating it, but not too much. I said in the intro, it's hard to have the discipline to not move it too much and to understand that.
Yeah, exactly. That strike zone and dead drift sort of is your baseline.
Yeah.
And then we can start to talk about how we move the streamer. And really when we discuss about moving streamers, it's sort of any animation, but the key is, again, to keep it small and a little more subtle. These are things like jigs and twitches. You can do little strips too. All that's good stuff. But the idea is to stay within that 10 inches cushion of water, whatever it might be, the strike zone itself, and ride that through.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking about getting it low. And people often want to say low and slow, low and slow. It's like those two words have to come together.
They sound good.
It's alliteration. That's what that's called, Austin.
No, that's called rhyming.
I think you're right. See? You're right.
It's the English degree.
It's not alliteration, Don. Now, if you were editing the podcast, you'd keep that in.
Oh, you're going to keep it in.
Anyway, so it doesn't have to be low and slow. I'll often get it low in the strike zone. Stay there because this is the crossover technique. But then I might do some really fast animations. They might be quick, let's say. Fast but not far. We say that a lot. Quick.
Yep.
But for only 2 or 3 inches. I might jig it up and jig it fast, like a boom. Jig it up 4 inches, but then let it drop. 4 inches and let it drop.
Yeah.
I'm also not saying that it always has to be fast. I'm saying that option's open for you. And I do that a lot. I use the rod tip to just pop or twitch. And that could be sideways. I'm trying to move the streamer sideways, maybe a little lane change, cross lanes, or I might jig it up.
Yep.
Those animations don't have to be slow just because you're low. I think it's really important.
Do you ever just drop and leave the fly on the bottom, like when you're doing this?
I was fishing one of our favorite rivers, Austin. We were on a boat because the water was high.
Nice.
And I was with Steve Sawyer. We were just talking about him a minute ago before we hit record. Yeah. And Steve is a big bass guy. And I've learned so much from Steve by, just watching the way he fish streamers, because he brought a lot of stuff over from bass techniques, different lures, all kinds of stuff.
Right.
And we'd be on a boat and he's like, slow down. I mean, he's fishing, I'm on the oars. He says, slow down, see if you can hold it. And I'd hold the boat, or it's just creeping along, and he would just keep his streamer laying on the bottom. Almost.
No kidding.
Yeah, almost right beside the boat. This one day especially, I saw him do it on 2 trips. And the one day he caught 5 fish doing it. And he would let it sit. I don't know, man. For me, I might not have the patience to let it sit 5 seconds, but I bet he let it sit 5 seconds, and then he'd just pop it up, jig it up.
Yeah.
But not far. Again, not out of that strike zone. I'm going to say 5-inch jig up, and bam. It was like the fish were just looking at it.
Were they eating it when it was dropping back down or when it moved?
As soon as it moved.
No kidding.
It's one of those times, like right after a jig, boom, they ate it. And maybe it was actually not moving straight up.
So were the fish hovering right next to it, theoretically, and then once it moved, they ate it? Could you see the eat?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I couldn't see him. We couldn't see him.
Yeah. That's like what bass do, so it makes sense.
Absolutely.
Pike and pickerel and do the same thing.
You could Google it. You could, YouTube it and see bass doing that. They'll just look at it. They'll follow a lure down. It sits on the bottom. You look up a Ned rig. We've talked about a Ned rig a couple times.
Yeah, good point.
In this episode. Seriously, you can look at them, just hover right next to a Ned rig, like almost right on top of it. As soon as it moves again, bam, they're eating it. Yep. So why the hell wouldn't it work with a streamer? Of course it would.
That's cool.
You know what I mean? You got to have the right streamer that isn't totally spooking them. You don't want a 5-inch streamer trying to do that.
Yeah.
Like, first of all, a 5-inch streamer, I don't care how heavy it is, it's not going to just hold down there in any current, right? Yeah, fair to say, pretty much. Everything's conditional, but come on, most 5-inch streamers have a lot of material resistance that's going to want to lift off of there, or get blown off of the bottom, right? Or just pushed off the bottom. Anyway, I'm saying you got to have the right fly. Plus, if they have a long time, multiple seconds to just look at that 5-inch streamer, they've rejected it. They're like, no, that's not real. That part's not real. That part's not real. Not eating that. And then they're out of there. Yep. If your streamer is right, and maybe one of these crossover streamers, and we'll talk about flies in a minute, what Steve was doing it with was the craft fur. And I've done it mostly with the craft fur and what I call a bunny flash. And I'm sure I would assume that others would work, but I've seen it mostly with the craft fur.
That's fun. That is really fun.
You have to have the right riverbed for that, of course. Many conditions have to set up for you to be able to just stall your streamer on the bottom, for it to not spook fish by not looking like totally stupid down there. Right? We did it on a ball jig. The craft fur on a ball jig.
Yeah.
And
it's right on that head.
Yeah, dude. It's kind of rotating around. It's neat. So, I mean, sometimes you do. You just let it lay on the bottom. Another option is lane changes and speed leads. I mean, you brought this up when you started talking about how we move the fly. Yes, like a streamer. Once you kind of establish almost the nymphing concept of down in the strike zone and mostly in one lane, then you start thinking, well, how do I want to move it? And lane changes and speed leads are something I do a lot, because you can keep it within this short range.
Right on. So, Dom, last time you and I were out, last week, you were explaining to me a sort of a concept of a basketball-sized radius or sphere of movement that you try to keep your fly in when you're fishing it in the crossover technique. Would you talk a little more about that, because it is somewhat of a different descriptor?
Yeah. This is one of the things I started thinking about somewhere around Christmas, and it has made a huge difference for me. Did I say huge? Okay.
With a Y? Yeah, you got it.
No, it really has. Once I get the streamer down in there, all I'm doing is letting it drop. But most of my streamers have enough weight to get down in there pretty quickly, and/or I'm adding split shot. Okay. Once it's in there and it's kind of established into that strike zone, then I start thinking about how it's in a globe. And I did say to you, it's like the size of a basketball.
Yeah.
And basketball is less than 10 inches. It's like 9.5 inches or something. And if you think like a basketball on the bottom of the river and your streamer kind of right in the middle of it, then I'll animate the streamer like within the globe, within the radius of that basketball.
Nice.
And within that size, like not I'll do animations, but I'm not going to move it out of there.
Yeah.
Now think about this too. So I might move it over. I might lane change it, but I'm only going to lane change it, let's say no more than 9 inches over. And then after I reestablish it, then that basketball moves over. So the streamer is in the center of the basketball again. Yeah. And then everything's drifting downstream. Then I might jig it up 3 inches and the basketball comes up with it and back down. You know what I mean?
I don't think the basketball can move.
I feel like you're just trying to be difficult.
No, because if the basketball just goes everywhere your fly does, then you're never leaving the basketball.
All right, so the basketball lags. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The streamer moves.
You don't want to break the ceiling or the radius of that. Right.
And if you do establish, basically the only time I guess the basketball is going to move is when you lane change.
Right on.
If you jig it up and come back down, make sure you're not jigging up more than 9 inches. That's all, right? Just a few inches.
4.5 inches.
4.5, because that's the radius. The diameter of a basketball is 9.5 inches, Austin.
Mm-hmm. Anyhow, that's a kind of a good mental illustration. And I've been thinking about that.
It works for me. It helps me stay disciplined. I'm trying to stay within that globe, within that sphere, as you said. But sphere is a very hard word for me to say.
Because of your new teeth.
I've gotten used to it.
Still learning.
I got used to my new tooth. I'm good.
Yeah.
It's a nice shot. Good job. That's nice.
All right. So should we talk about what the technique looks a little bit like to a trout then?
Oh, to the trout themselves.
Yeah.
Well, they see like an orange basketball coming down the river. And and they're like, I'm getting away from that.
Yeah.
And then they kind of see it's like semi-transparent, right?
Mm.
And then they'll go through the basketball and eat the fly. No problem.
No problem at all.
That's what they see down there.
Awesome.
Okay.
So, all right. So imagine a dying or a disoriented bait fish kind of bumbling along the bottom of the riverbed, struggling, about to lose all hope, and it doesn't have any direction, right? That's why we want to fish the fly. That's a very available, a very vulnerable look to the fish, and it's really easy to eat. And that's why there are fewer refusals of this style.
Yeah. I think the crossover style helps to kind of maximize the fly's time in that prime water, right where the fish is. It might be right next to a log or something like that. We're not moving it very far. We're moving it well within the diameter of that basketball down there. And so we're not stripping it, boom, 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 moving it all the time.
Yeah.
It can hold that seam. It can show it to that fish longer. It can be more available for longer periods of time.
Right. There's not much urgency involved because it's not really trying to escape. It's just struggling.
Yeah,
to get
but it's
anywhere,
not like
really.
we're not moving it.
No,
we're
exactly.
not just dead drifting it.
Exactly.
You know?
Yep.
Minor animations. It's very easy to overdo any animations.
That's a good point.
And the key here, and I think what I've gotten a lot better at, it took me about 5 or 6 or 8 years to get better at it, is just the minor animations.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, that basketball concept helped me out.
When I try to do that or focus on minor animations, I think maybe we mentioned this last week or so. I'm always thinking about just trying to move the rod tip instead of my arm or the rod itself.
Yeah.
Just utilizing the tip of the rod to do that minimal work. Because when you get much further than that, and of course you can overdo it with the rod tip too, but it's an easy place to start to isolate some of that movement.
Yeah. And if the rod tip is 10 feet away from you on a 10-foot rod, boy, it is easy to overdo the rod tip animation too. You just can't move it very far. If you move your hand or your wrist a half inch, well then up at the rod tip, it probably just moved 5 inches.
Yeah.
Maybe it sounds silly, but it's not a bad idea to video yourself doing something once in a while. Like I've learned a lot since I started on the Fish and Film series. I was like, that's how much the rod's moving, or that's what angle I was at. Oh, I was crossing lanes, all kinds of stuff. Especially if I edit the footage very soon after I just fished, because I got a really good memory of what I thought I was doing.
Right.
And then I see what I was doing. I'm like, oh. And sometimes it kind of solidifies what I thought I was doing. And other times I'm like, oh, that's a big error.
Yeah. It's like watching game film after you play or something.
Yeah, it absolutely. It's like a sport all of a sudden. There you go. Now you're a pro athlete. You're a pro fisherman, Austin Dando.
There's a lot of money in that. Not many people know that.
So we should talk about rigs. The mono rig gives you ultimate control at longer distances. You also then get room for more animations. The further away you cast, then the more animations, the more you get to choose about, hey, I can do this.
More time you got.
Yeah, going to come out of the speed lead, do a lane change. Then I'm going to jig it up, and then I'm going to do a head flip. You get room if you can cast it 35 feet away rather than 15 feet away.
Yep.
And you need contact to that streamer. And you can do this with a floating line and a 9-foot leader. You really can. You can do it, but you have to stay closer. You just have to stay close enough so that you are basically tight lining to it.
Yeah, keeping the line out.
Yeah, and I just said like a floating line and a 9-foot leader. That's pretty much the Joe Humphreys rig. It might have been a 10 or 12-foot leader, but the idea from Humphreys was he was nymphing, with some fly line out, but not much. 2, 3, maybe 5 feet of fly line out, and then a kind of almost regular leader. There was some taper in it, but fly line was not touching the water, hardly ever, and therefore you're basically tight lining. A little bit of fly line out of the guides. Anyway, if you do it that way with now a streamer, with this crossover mindset, you can do it with a floating line and a 9-foot leader.
Sure.
You just have to stay close enough. You have to understand what your rig allows you to do. If I fished a micro mono rig, I could probably get 35 to 40 feet away and just pure tight line it without having to lay anything down. If I fish my standard mono rig, I can probably get 30 to 35 feet away without having to lay anything down. So I'm sacrificing 5 feet. Now, I don't necessarily hate when line is laying on the water when I'm doing a streamer presentation, and I can work with that. You just have to be honest about what your range is. Know your range.
And use a sighter too. I think that's worth mentioning when we're using these
Good
tight
point.
line rigs, or you can do it too with a floating line as well. You can incorporate a sighter into your
Absolutely.
leader, but use a visible sighter and know how to read it and know what you're looking for. It's another great tool to measure your depth, measure the speed in which you're drifting. It's another visual cue to show you how much you're moving your fly up and down, because you can watch that sighter move at the same time.
Yeah.
It's just a really helpful thing to incorporate.
Like you said, you got to know how to read it. It's not a strike. It's not only a strike indicator. It's that it shows you the depth of your fly, the speed of your fly, the angle that your fly is. It crossing currents or holding one current? The sighter shows you everything.
Yep.
And as a tight line nymph angler, we know all this stuff. We're good at reading the sighter. We really are. For me, excellent polarized lenses are a critical piece of gear every day that I'm on the water. Tajima Direct has changed what I see in the river. Tajima Direct offers top-tier lens replacement services with the best polarized lens technology on the market. They offer both prescription and non-prescription lenses, so you can upgrade the lenses in your favorite frames with purpose-built lens tints that are specifically developed for fly fishing. Check out my 100-day gear review article on the Troutbitten website. Tajima's patented technology cuts glare and enhances clarity like no other lens that I've worn. I especially love their low light specific yellow-green 40 polarized lens, which is perfect for early mornings, late evenings, and the cloudy days that we all enjoy so much. Tajima Direct offers excellent service and the best lenses on the market, along with much better pricing than your local eye doctor can offer. Clear vision and more detail with less strain so you can see more fish. That's what Tajima Direct delivers. Visit tajima-direct.com. That's TAJIMA-direct.com. Upgrade your lenses and see what you've been missing. For over a decade, Smith Creek has designed and built outstanding gear for the serious angler. Smith Creek's net holster is the perfect solution to hold your favorite net. I've been using mine every day on the water for over 9 years. Its ergonomic design helps you draw your net quickly when you need it, while keeping your net firmly in place and out of the way when you don't. Made from rugged materials and hand-assembled, Smith Creek's net holster is built to last. All Smith Creek gear is backed by their outstanding customer service no matter where or when you bought it. To stay up to date on their latest specials, follow Smith Creek on Instagram at SmithCreekNZ. Quality you can depend on from a brand you can trust. Smith Creek. So Austin, do you think we can do this with a sinking line?
This one's going to be awfully hard to do. In order to cast it in and put it right to the bottom and hold it in the lane and give it slight animations and be in touch, I'm going to say it's nothing's impossible, but no, it's really not very suitable.
I agree with you. I thought about this a lot, especially when I was kind of preparing for this podcast.
Yeah.
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say you can't do the crossover with a sinking line.
Not the way that we're describing it, at least.
Right.
Yeah.
You can get low and into strike zone, but
Right.
you're not going to have the ability to keep it in that globe, right, without it kind of getting too speedy this way or that way.
Yeah.
You can't really do these minor animations. You can't do much of any animation if you got 10 feet, even just 10 feet of sinking line under the water.
And to be in touch with it as much as what we're saying, like for that globe, there has to be a certain amount of awareness or a lot of
Good
awareness
call.
really about what you're doing. And you lose some of that in a disconnect with the weight of the weighted fly line.
Yeah, that's very fair. And I just think we're being honest about it. You can't do it with a sinking line.
Yeah.
A couple more things about the rig. I said earlier, I love putting a tag nymph, I'm going to say 2 feet up, 20 inches, 2 feet, maybe 30 inches up above the streamer. I'm talking about adding a tag nymph above the streamer. I do that a lot, and that's the original way I started doing it,
Yeah,
because
cool.
I was like, I'm going to fish both tactics. This is why I call it a crossover. I'm going part streamer, and then I got the nymph on there, so I'll do part nymphing. And honestly, when I have the nymph on there, it inspires me. Like on the next cast, or it convinces me, like, you know what? I got the nymph on there. Let me just pure nymph this. Let me try to get the best dead drift on a nymph that I can in one lane that looks really convincing as a nymph. And then on the next cast, I go, you know what? I got a streamer on there. So let me just pitch it over to the bank and just jerk strip off the bank real fast, you know? And that's kind of how the crossover started for me. If you go back and read that article from 2019, I almost always would add a nymph to it. I said I would tag one, but I will also trail one off the streamer. I do that quite a bit. I tend to use really small and unweighted things when I'm going to trail them off of a streamer. Yeah, I'd run them like, I don't know, 14 to 18, maybe 20 inches at the most.
What kind of nymphs would you be doing that with?
Same stuff as I'll trail off of, like a Pat's rubber legs or even an egg pattern.
Yeah.
We call it the bait and switch. You know that, right? Like the same stuff I'd do with the bait and switch.
What about when you're tagging them? You use the same flies when you're tagging them too?
No, the tag flies are what I would normally put on a tag, which would be like a 14, 16, or 18 beadhead pheasant tail, France fly, something like that. Something that's not going to grab the currents too much. But I've also tagged woolly buggers and stuff up there. I'm telling you, for me, whatever I put, especially on that tag, I tend to want to fish it that way.
Yeah, of course.
And when I trail, those flies they're unweighted because I don't want them to stick to the bottom. I'm trying to keep my streamer down there in the strike zone. And when I've fished any like beadhead fly, I mean any, like even like a 2 millimeter bead, it hits the bottom. It catches the bottom. So I'll use an unweighted RS2.
Yeah, nice.
WD-40. These are flies. Little crest bug.
Yep.
We always talk about these as kind of our go-to unbeaded trailer flies, or flies with split shot, things like that.
Sure.
So when you do the crossover, Austin, do you pair it up with a nymph very much?
Something I used to do. Honestly, I never thought about it like you just described. I always thought about it as a streamer tactic that maybe they would eat the nymph. So I never really gave a lot of dedicated maybe inspiration, or maybe never drew much inspiration from the tag. I don't really do it anymore. I'd say for the last couple of years I haven't done it.
No kidding.
Yeah. I should do it again though, because honestly, I almost forgot about it. So I still think about the tag and trailing it, I still think about the trailing, but I don't really do the tag thing anymore. So maybe I should get back into that.
Well, if you keep the tag nymph small and streamlined, again, like a size 16 pheasant tail, it's not going to affect your drift.
No, it's not the reason I'm not doing it anymore. I just feel like I was never very successful at it.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of days where, I mean it, they'd eat the nymph 2 to 1.
Yeah.
That's why I started keeping it on there in the beginning. But it depends on how you're moving it.
Let me ask you this then. So when they're eating that nymph 2 to 1, would you keep the streamer on down there, or would you just switch it out for like a heavier anchor nymph and then just dial in your nymph drift really well? And then would they eat it better?
Or double up, with that size 16 pheasant tail.
Or did you think the streamer had something to do with why they're eating that tag?
Good point. Now, our buddy Grobe would say the streamer had a lot to do with it. He's a big one on pairs of flies.
Don't change it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably the better idea. Yeah, if they're eating the tag over and over, that's data to me. And I'm saying I'm running my tag in this crossover like 2 feet up, and it starts to tell me, hey, I should be fishing nymphs 2 feet off, or you factor in your angle. I should be fishing nymphs like 14 inches off the bottom. And that's what I will start to change to. And I probably get away from the crossover idea.
Right.
Or you could just stick with it. And once in a while, they're still whacking the streamer if you're lucky.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the point.
Yeah. The whole thing has taught me a lot about, the difference between how we drift a nymph and how we drift or move a streamer. It's so subtle. If you move a nymph just a little bit, they'll eat it. I mean, if I think like a nymph, if I visualize really that nymph, whether it's tag or trailer, if I'm visualizing that nymph, then I end up fishing it very much like a dead drift with really subtle animations.
Yeah.
And then they eat it.
Yeah.
But if I think more like a streamer, or I prioritize the streamer, I'm visualizing the streamer, then I start to do more short pops and twitches and jigs and lane changes, all trying to stay within that basketball globe.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, and then they don't eat the nymph that much. And that is really what I've been starting to lean to, or I'm coming back to, in the last, I guess it's been three or 4 months now.
All right, so then we should probably talk about the flies themselves.
Flies
And,
don't matter, Austin. Flies don't matter.
Yeah,
We're
right.
not talking about flies. this
Lines,
season.
leaders, flies, like we
Doesn't
disclaimed at the beginning of the series. None of that matters.
We're liars. Miss Troutbitten guys. Bunch of liars.
We haven't gotten any questions. At least you haven't chosen any of those ones lately.
We addressed some.
Yeah. But you kind of alluded to this earlier in the fact that maybe the size of the fly is something that we could hit on first, and how we're often fishing these on a bit of a smaller average, and probably 1.5 to 3 inches on the max, because
three's getting big.
Yeah,
Yep.
and bigger flies too. They just come with too much to reject. Just like we were talking earlier about Sawyer's dropping something on the bottom, you don't want to give it 5 inches because when you have a bunch of fiber and stuff and feathers all flying around, the idea is that you can establish the dead drift, right, and then deviate from there. And when we're thinking about these animations and what the fly looks like and how a trout may be viewing it, when you build a fly that's complex and it's large and has lots of moving pieces, there's a lot to look unnatural there.
Yeah.
So the smaller the fly, the less there is to be suspicious of, I suppose.
I agree with you. You said 1.5 is kind of the smallest. I know there's guys out there fishing like 1-inch streamers.
Yeah.
Now, that's cool. I've fished them. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's a mindset thing again, and I start nymphing it too much because it's so small.
Right.
And I guess here I'm saying, 1.5 versus 1. There is quite a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I get a lot of questions about like, hey, what size streamers are you talking about? I don't care about the size. The hook size. I care about length. That's how I've started measuring streamers.
Yep.
I want to know how long they are.
Yep. Head to tail.
Yes. And of course the mass matters too. Is it streamlined or is it big and bushy? I get that. I don't necessarily know that I'm going to measure the circumference of my streamers. We've talked about measuring the drop rate of streamers. That's a cool idea.
Yeah.
But basically I'm saying when I'm communicating with people, and you know this, lately I've been saying like, yeah, my streamer was 2.5 inches. It might have been tied on a size 10 hook or a size 4 hook, but it was 2.5 inches from head to tail, as you said. I think that's what matters. I do think the key here is don't get too big. 3, you said, is the max. I would agree with that. For me, that's about the maximum. I think, now here again, this is another thing that I've really changed in the last few months. I've been going smaller. I have fished those 1-inch streamers, and 1.5 is not something I had fished too much. I already had my set of favorite streamers, and some of them were on the small side, and I said, those are the ones I'm going to fish. Mm-hmm. And I would fish the crossover with those 3-inch streamers and sometimes 2.5-inch streamers. Now, when I've been going to 1.5, 2.5, I'd say really the 2 to 2.5-inch streamer is kind of my go-to now for this crossover idea, and it's definitely making a difference.
That's really cool.
I think fly size is the most important thing about the fly, the head to tail inches.
Yeah, I think it's important too there that many of your favorite streamers will work, and probably they'll work in the way that you tie them already. You don't have to buy special hooks like jig hooks or anything like that. You can utilize your existing inventory. Yeah. And then sometimes just adapt them with a little more weight or add split shot, right? We want to use the weight that's necessary and not be afraid of it. So much of this is possible because we're using the correct amount of weight.
Yeah.
Do not fear the weight.
Fear no weight.
Fear no weight.
We've talked about that now 3 podcasts in a row. We talked about it first with jigging and then speed leads and lane changes. We said you got to have weight to jig so it can fall again back down there. It has to have weight.
Absolutely.
And now here we're going to say it again. If you're trying to be in the strike zone, and you are with this crossover technique, it's just got to be down in the strike zone, or else I'm not calling it a crossover. And so it's in there. And if you really want to move it in almost any way, you have to have some weight. 50 centigrams, 75 centigrams, almost minimal to me.
Not much there.
No, there's not. But again, a nymph that size is pretty heavy. I don't know, medium heavy is what I'd call like 75 centigrams. That's almost minimal. 50 centigrams. Like it's got to be like 75 centigrams. And 1.5 grams, sometimes 2 grams. That's about as heavy as I'm fishing is 2 grams. But you could fish more, absolutely. And your waters might be very different than ours. And you just got to get down there. Hey, you don't want to spend half the drift waiting for it to get down there. Yep. So, Yeah, the weight's necessary, obviously. And where's the weight? Put it in a ball head. Put it in a lead ball jig if your state allows that. That's a great way to do it. A lead ball jig, like a crappie jig or a bass jig. Those are great things. And if you don't like that, put it on a tungsten head. And I do that a lot now because I'll use, again, these flies that I don't want them to be 3 inches long anymore. So I'll use, jig hooks and throw a tungsten bead on there. You can get tungsten beads now. They're up to I think 7.5.
It's insane.
Right, 7.5 millimeter.
Yeah,
I haven't have any of those. I do have 6.5, and I regularly use 5.5.
Yeah.
4.5 millimeter with some lead wrap on the shank is probably my standard. That gets me with my flies to about 125 centigrams. There, I'm getting very specific again.
Well, I think that points to something too, that we can probably use the same flies for multiple techniques that we've covered in these episodes. For example, like jig streamers.
Thanks.
Like those flies that you could often use that you're describing while jigging would be good things to use here as well.
Yeah.
So there's some crossover there.
Some crossover on the crossover.
Yep.
I'll say one more thing about the flies. I have a bunny bullet streamer. My favorite version has no bead on it. It has a little bit of lead in the body, honestly, so it'll kind of rock back and forth a little bit without tension. And usually it's 3 inches long, but I now tie them at 2 inches. And I've put bead heads on them, and that's a good fly too. But I've been keeping them without bead heads at a 2-inch bunny bullet. You go over to trout, just Google Troutbitten bunny bullet, you'll find the pattern. And no bead, and then I'll put split shot in front of it. Now, I'm going to say, if you're going to use split shot on a streamer, especially for this crossover technique, I'm keeping the split shot 4 to 5 inches away. You may not need the weight of the split shot that you're thinking. You won't need 1.5 grams, I bet. Yeah, I've been using 80 centigrams, maybe a gram of split shot. You can combine different numbers. That doesn't matter. But anyway, I think the key is keep it close. Don't put your split shot 2 feet away because you got no control, no strike detection. And I say no control. No control then over those animations, really. You're animating the split shot. What's the fly doing? You don't know when it's 2 feet away. But if you put that split shot 4 or 5 inches away from your streamer, you're going to know what your streamer's doing. I suppose the fair follow-up question would be, why not just put it right on the nose of the fly? You ever seen guys recommend that?
I haven't seen it recommended. I've seen many people.
I've seen that in a few books.
Do that.
I don't like it. For me, it doesn't work. It doesn't work when I do it with a nymph.
Either.
I don't like it with a streamer either. Now, what's the difference of that and a tungsten bead at the head?
Well, that's
I'm
always
not
the question, right?
I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Maybe I haven't tried it enough. Heck, you could use a muddler minnow that's 2.5 inches and put it down there with a split shot. You get some really neat presentations too.
Yeah.
Yeah, because anytime you're using split shot, let's say 5 inches away, then again, we've talked about this. The streamer has some room to maneuver with the currents and not just reacting to everything that you do. You get a little bit of grace there.
Yeah.
And that's a very cool thing. It can kind of flutter around in a way that a heavy head on a fly cannot.
That's a good point.
I think that's pretty good about the flies, Austin, right?
Yeah, I'd say we covered that.
So we're getting long on this one. Most of these skill series episodes are not this long.
Well, you've been messing around.
Well, I feel like you've led us down these paths.
Always
these
someone
side-
else's fault, isn't it?
Hey, we were in Argentina this time last year.
Yeah, we were. How about? And my
Right?
phone popped up. It does that memory thing, and it popped up some pictures from
It's
there.
a smartphone, Austin.
Yeah. Got one of them. Got one of them smartphones. It's got the YouTube app on it.
It's got the YouTubes.
Yep, I like that one.
The Netflix channel has that on there.
Life has to help me find it. Yeah.
Anyway, just a couple tips, a couple more things about fishing a crossover. What do you have?
I think I'll hit again on lanes, and the crossover style is really about lanes and the current seams of a river. And it's important to know what lane your streamer starts in, and then know when you're deliberately changing it. So one thing that I like to do, and I carry this over from nymphing too, is if I am intentionally trying to stay in one lane, then yes, watch where it goes in, and then watch where it comes out. Look upstream and draw a line between those two places and see how that fly traveled. and do the opposite. Okay, put it in here and then decide I'm going to try to change 1 or 2 lanes over, 2 or 3 feet towards myself, and then get to the end of your drift, remove the fly, and see if you really stayed to that, or I actually traveled like 7 or 8 feet over.
Yeah, right on.
And it's good to learn self-control and a little bit of awareness of how your rod and your line tracks flies.
Self-control and discipline is what a lot of this crossover stuff is about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing I do is use a visible streamer in thin water to really learn what the strips and the rod motions are doing.
There you go. Yep. Sure.
It teaches me to be able to work within that globe. And you also realize you could work in like, I want to say knee-deep water with 1.5 grams on a lead ball jig or whatever, probably a 5.5 bead with a whole bunch of lead wraps on it. And you could take that fly and work it really well in the strike zone, not hit the bottom all that much, right down in that thin water that's also moving, let's say walking pace. Anyway, visible streamer. I think that's something that's really helped me out.
Yeah, and I think working the streamer through the lanes and focusing on structure is another thing that helps. And we're looking for things like rocks and logs and gravel bars or color changes in the riverbed. Any of those things, they're all excellent targets to use these animations that we're describing here.
Yeah,
good place for a fish to get hung up and peter out its last bit of life.
Yeah, I feel like you're taking advantage of the weaker fish.
Yeah,
the small ones.
Well, the smart anglers do.
You talked about structure. It makes me think of like how, I don't know, if I'm 35 feet away from the bank and I'm fishing this, kind of disciplined 1 lane crossover approach, and I'm being, I'm looking at it. I'm like, okay, good. Oh, don't move it too much out of that basketball globe. And then I look over that, man, that's a juicy log jam over there on the bank. I pitch my streamer over there. I might not be in the perfect position to be,
Sure.
I might have to throw a little bit across and downstream to get to it. So what? I got a streamer on.
Absolutely.
I'm going to throw it over there, let it sink a little bit, whatever.
Especially if you got weight.
Exactly.
Another
And
good
whatever.
reason.
I have a streamer on. I have a bait fish imitation on. I'm going to go ahead and fish it whatever way I want to fish it. I mean, it's a streamer. Move it. But then I try to get back to that mindset of crossover.
Yeah.
When you and I fished together, you brought up our fishing trip a little while back.
Yeah, when I caught all this fish and you watched.
I don't remember you catching them.
Yeah.
I feel like we were pretty even in pretty mediocre results.
I don't remember it that way, but go on.
No. I'll go on. I'll say my excuse. I texted you this too. I said my excuse.
Yeah.
Really, the water was deeper, a little deep for that river for that, for that time. And I just was not getting down in the strike zone for long enough. And then I started doing all my other favorite stuff, often so I could see the fly because it makes me happy to see the fly. But then I'm riding mid-column and doing faster and not necessarily even faster, but just things that I hadn't planned on doing.
Sure.
And they weren't eating very well every so often.
Yeah.
But I wasn't disciplined. And I got to the end of the day and I did say, like, I didn't fish that well. Before you and I met up, when nobody was looking, I was I was fishing. My first shift, because you had to do other stuff and couldn't get out till 3:30. So the first shift for me,
work.
I did better.
No, you didn't.
But I was also, no, I did. I was upstream.
Oh, in self-control, you mean?
Right. I fished better. I didn't catch more.
Yeah, okay.
But
Just
I
checking.
could walk away from it saying, I fished pretty well.
Yeah.
The point is I was more disciplined earlier and I did catch it. My catch rate was a little higher. Yep. Because nobody was looking.
Yep.
Say whatever I want.
That's right.
But no, I think you can be honest with yourself, right? Like, I didn't do what I planned on doing. It is really easy to slip out of your plan. And I think that's happened to me too often on the crossover, but lately I've been better at it. I got one more thing, and then I'm going to ask you, so you can start thinking, Austin, right? Because I'm going to ask you right after this. Here's my one more thing that I've realized. It's hard to fish a streamer slow, but also keep moving fast. And I think that was one of my problems before too. And now I've been doing better at it.
Oh, I see. Like covering water.
Right.
With a
Streamers
slow,
require you to cover water. I don't care if the fly is 1.5 inches. Once they've seen it, and if you're moving it much like a streamer, once they've seen it, they're not going to eat it on your 10th presentation. They will eat a nymph on the 10th presentation once you get that drift just right. It's at the right level. It's coming down the right way. Nice dead drift. Bam, they eat it. You're like, yep, figured out the current, figured out the level, got them to eat.
Yep.
And they're eating a size 14, a size 16. But even your 1.5 inch streamer is 15 to 20 times that size. They've already rejected it. They've already seen your streamer. They've already made a decision. So that's why streamer fishing just has to cover water. You have to cover water fast. And I think as I try to be disciplined about, just staying within that basketball globe idea of coming down one lane, shifting lane, sure, but like not doing too much, then I'm generally fishing much slower. The animations, the presentation, let's say, is much slower than I'd like to do with a streamer. And then I start to not cover water as much. But now I've gotten better at saying, nope, I'm going to stay on this streamer pace, and like each lane gets like one look, maybe two, and then I'm moving on. You got to keep moving. And once they've seen it there, get out of there. It might be 5 feet over or 5 feet, whatever. You got to keep moving because it's a streamer.
Right on.
Now, anything else, Austin?
I've got a different one for this week.
Okay.
So our good buddy Greg reached out to me the other day and said he was listening to the podcast and specifically the jigging one. And, when we were talking about, specifically like lead ball jigs, he sent me a picture of these like mushroom head jigs. And he says he fishes them in a 130 seconds, 116, and 1/8. And when I was thinking of the conversation we had earlier tonight about Sawyer dropping his fly on the bottom and letting it sit there, I was curious to maybe get your thoughts on, or if you've tried this before, maybe these mushroom style jig heads in that type of scenario. Seems like it could be really killer.
That's a Ned rig. Ned rig heads are mushroom style jig heads. And I don't know if the Ned rig craze, whatever, popularized that mushroom head jig style, but they're fairly popular, like in the bass world, I'm just saying, in the gear world. And it'll sit, well, you have to have the right riverbed, but assuming you have a not too fast current and you have a fairly flat bottom, they will sit, they'll stand on their head.
Right. And that's what Greg said, they present very vertically versus laying on the bottom.
They do vertically. Now you have to have the right materials that are tied on the fly. I think that craft fur, like I said, seemed to do it the best. Now, that was actually on a ball head. I've never tied a fly on a mushroom jig head, but I know guys have. I've seen that. I've seen that.
Yeah. Yeah. He sent me a picture. It's basically woolly buggers.
Oh, super cool.
Yeah.
There's a guy on Instagram, Jig Squad. I like this guy. He does just some really neat stuff. Saltwater guy, but not just saltwater, just makes jigs.
Nice.
Generally bigger than what we're talking about, but a lot of the same styles. I mean, I look at that and I go, ooh, I'd fish that. But it's on like a 1/8 ounce or a 1/4 ounce. Like, well, I wouldn't fish that on a fly rod, but hey, I could bring that down to a 1/16 or a 1/32 ounce. Right. There's just a lot of great ideas out there. Those mushroom head jig styles, that's very cool. I'd be curious. You got to get in touch with Greg and ask him what he's putting on the fly to get that vertical presentation. You could put foam, like a Ned rig, for example. It has air. I don't know if it has air impregnated, like bubbles in the Ned rig.
I thought it was just the weight of the shape and weight of the mushroom itself. But if you have material that sinks, the whole jig is gonna lay down. Yeah. But if you have, I'm saying like that rubber Ned rig material, is like the size of your pinky finger, right? It's a rubber bait. Yeah. And you put it on there, and that bait, once it's buoyant. If you drop it in water, it doesn't sink. Yeah. If you put it on the bottom of the river, it wants to float up. So it takes the jig in that vertical presentation, as Greg said. Now, I don't know necessarily what fly tying materials you would use outside of foam. I can't think of them. Yeah. I've heard people talking about it. The Ned rig is not unpopular. No, not at all.
People know about it, and I know lots of guys have tried to imitate that.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. There it is, the crossover technique. So the crossover is a lot of fun, and it's a very targeted approach to fishing streamers. Instead of spraying casts and hoping, we bring the streamer directly to the trout with plenty of control from the angler and by following through with a plan. Also, while a drifting fly may be the origin of the crossover, the strength of this style is in the versatility and possibility at the end of your line. You have a bait fish imitation tied to your leader. So bang it over by that undercut as you walk past. Jig it once, then let it drift. Twitch and short strip it through the stall. Then do a lane change into the fast current on the right and speed lead it next to the log before picking up for the next cast. All while keeping the streamer right in the strike zone. The variety of good presentations on a streamer are endless. Hey, next week we're covering another mindset or collection of movements that we call the tight line dance, which is a lot more about watching the fly while mixing in our favorite animations. I hear you clearing your throat, Austin. Are you ready for the read?
Getting ready. I'm getting ready.
Okay, well then, go ahead. I mean, do you need an invitation? Austin Dando, will you clear your throat and read us out?
Remember, the Troutbitten Project is a free resource for all anglers.
That is really nice.
The Troutbitten website hosts over 1,500 articles, videos, and podcasts with endless stories, commentaries, tactics, tips, and more. Find what you like through the top menu and through the search page. Navigate by way of the categories and the tags too. Be sure to find the Troutbitten YouTube channel, now featuring the Troutbitten Tip Series, Fly Fishing the Mono Rig, and the Troutbitten Fly Box, all in collaboration with Wilds Media. You'll also find the fish and film videos and the new Riverside series, all on their own playlists on Troutbitten YouTube. Thank you for listening to the Troutbitten Podcast. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave a comment because it really helps. Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, cross over, and find your life on the water.
You learn so much, Aren't you thankful? I mean, when you're 20 years older and with 20 years more experience, you'll come up with some ideas,
You don't know this, but Becky pays me to spend time with you.